In the time of mystagogia, that was the big word that I shared with you last week, the idea was that those who were recently baptized really had to spend not just reflection time on the experience of their baptism, but now that they are full members of the community, had to learn the mysteries, if you will, of the community itself. In the very opening prayer, that was the words, Mysterium Tremendum, this mysterious, or the mystery of the tremendous, if you will. That's one way to translate it. This is a great experience, one that is oftentimes beyond our comprehension and beyond our imagination. And so it takes some time, gentle walking time, if you will, but gentle time to kind of have it all begin to make sense to us. And not that it ever will. I'm convinced, at least I'm kind of one that I want all the answers. I want all the knowledge. I want it all. And it's not going to be there. I don't even think that when we get up to the gates and we go, God, I've got this long list of wondering whys and questions. I want to know this. God's going to say, does it really matter anymore? And in a sense, it's right. It's not going to matter. All the questions that we have even now aren't going to matter in the end. It doesn't mean that we stop questioning or that we stop asking. My Jewish neighbors that I often share, I said to them this morning, I'm often embarrassed because I share your, and I didn't tell them, I shared in my preaching at church on Sunday, but I said I often tell stories about your family, and especially about your little boy. And she said, oh yes, she says, and the father chimed in right away, he's very much into philosophy now. And I kind of looked at him, he's like 6 years old, philosophy. And so she told me this story where he learned this new word about giving in, and it was a Hebrew word about giving in, and so he was going to wanted to have some raisins, and his mom said, so okay, so she gave him raisins, but he wanted to go to the couch to eat the raisins. And she said, no, you sit here at the counter. And he said, Mom, you haven't learned how to give in. And his mother she said, I looked at him like, what? He said, well, you've got to learn how to give in. And he went through this whole logical argument. If somebody wants to do something, but you don't want them to do it, that somehow or another you've got to learn how to give in to the person who wants to do something. So that if somebody wants to have the raisins at the couch, you've got to learn how to give in so he can have the raisins at the couch. And I kind of looked at him like, wow, this 6-year-old kid can really reason. And I said, please don't take that away from him. In other words, don't take this ability to kind of imagine this argument, how he's going to argue himself into something that he wants. Don't take that away from him. And his father said, oh, no. We don't want to ever try to take that away from him, but we just want to try to get him to sit at the counter and have his raisins. That's the Mysterium Tremendum, this great mystery that we are a part of. And I think because we're so used to seeing things not only in living Technicolor in 3D, that something, it's just not anymore what we engage ourselves in. How many, remember, at least for you in terms of when your children were little, that you actually told them bedtime stories and fairy tales? How many did that? Right? So many of you did. And the idea was that the truth of those stories wasn't in the telling of the story or in the content of the story, but there was a truth embedded in that story that somehow you hoped that the little one would grasp, right? But you told the story because it engaged the imagination. And then pretty soon they went off to school and lost all imagination. How many times I was yelled at for staring out the window daydreaming. Stop daydreaming! Well, I'm imagining the world out there because I can't figure out all this math and science that you're trying to teach me. I think there's more out there in the world. That's why I flunked geometry in my sophomore year of high school. Because there was no way that I actually believed the postulates and the theorems of geometry, that there wasn't a world out there where two parallel lines were indeed defined by intersecting, not parallel. There had to be another world out there. Because I just didn't want to accept the reality of this theorem and postulate. And And my teachers didn't care. D, F. I don't care what you're imagining in another world. D, F. Okay. I still didn't want to memorize those things. The idea is that the newly baptized have entered into a community for which they could be overwhelmed. Because, you see, we do have kind of secret language. Maybe it's not secret per se, but we have language. And maybe we don't ever use that vocabulary with one another anymore. But we kind of know what's expected of us, right? We kind of know when we do things or when we enter things of what's expected of us. Well, somebody who's new in the community who, didn't have any idea at all who God was, let alone who Jesus might be, that they've entered in a community that has a way of thinking and believing and doing, that if they're not educated in it, or at least, spend time learning about what it is, that they're going to be totally lost and maybe eventually lose interest altogether. One of the sad statistics I remember in the Catholic Church for those who, when we went through this long process, 5 weeks of Lent, in the process of helping those who were interested in being baptized, that they get to the Easter Vigil and they get baptized, and they're really enthusiastic and excited about their baptism. Over 50% of them in a year had already stopped going to church. 50% of those who were baptized at Easter had already stopped going to church. Now, I don't know if any actual studies as to why, but I suspect that it's because the community was still too closed. That simply showing up and being in the same pew with them on Sunday wasn't enough. And many of them, that's all they thought. They had already gotten the golden ring, and that's all they needed. They were baptized, and they didn't need to do anything more. So this Mysterium Tremendum takes some time to figure out and to learn about and to spend time reflecting on it and trying to get the lingo down. Because if we don't get the lingo, then we're not going to know. You'll be totally lost. Just like those 4 words in the first reading today, I included the Greek words because it's important to know what those words are connected to. Right? Look at it. Kerygma, koinonia, Eucharistia, liturgia, diakonia. 5 words. And you did excellent in pronouncing them. Thank you. These are very technical words for the Christian community. Ones that we don't use, and you see the English translations, but they limp a little bit. They're not really adequate enough. And the reason why they're important to know, because at least in the early community for the first couple of 100 years, that these were the identifying marks of being a Christian community. That people, in other words, that if somebody was on the outside of the community looking in and they happened to hear people at the marketplace, my church, did you hear the pastor's preaching last week? He said this, and this, and they were at the local Agora Safeway in Athens, and they're having this conversation. I'm sure, doesn't that happen? Not that you're at the Agora in Athens, but that you're at Safeway and you overhear somebody passing along they're going the opposite direction, which they should never do. They're going counterclockwise in the supermarket instead of going, just drives me up a wall when you're going counterclockwise. You go clockwise. You go in this way and out that way. But there they are, and they're talking about what the preacher is doing. And they might be interested. They go, oh, wow, what's going on over there? But then, as you're going out to the parking lot, the person that was just talking about the pastor, talking about compassion, just about runs them over in the car. And so they're there going, whoa, wait a minute, there's a disconnect here. They're talking about how great it is that the pastor's talking about compassion when they sure didn't show it. And so if internally within the community, they're not able to see the very values and the very principles of Jesus' own life, then they're going to go, boy, they're a bunch of hypocrites over there. They say this about Jesus, but none of it is evident in the way that they live their lives or organize their community. And so that's a part of what these words are, that said to the neophyte, to the one who is newly baptized, that they not only have to learn what the lingo is, but they have to also be ready and willing to commit to living out those very words, that they can't be just concepts in their head, that they have to be a concrete reality in their life. So the first one, in terms of charisma or teaching, that there has to be a way in which the community doesn't think that they have arrived at their destination. You know, I used to think that in the Catholic Church you accumulated all these days of indulgences, you know. That's why Martin Luther, you know, the whole Reformation. Because I thought that once I got to 40, I could take the rest of my life off. I had a savings account of indulgences, and all I needed to do, you know, at 50 or 60 is to dip into the savings account. And that's what I thought. And when I found out that that wasn't true, I was very disappointed, needless to say. What? You mean I have to live this way to the day I die, that I don't have a savings account to draw on to get me off the hook when I'm in trouble? No. This person I was telling this to, they looked at me like, "You're a priest and you don't know this?" And I went, "No, I just assumed that that's how it went." And so the teaching has to be, and I'm serious about this, because oftentimes I'm convinced that Christians, that when they get to a certain age level, like retirement, that there's nothing more that they have to do about their faith. You know it all, right? Right? Now, you better be careful, because if you're shaking your head yes, then you miss the point. No, we never know enough. We don't. That's what the idea of the mysterium tremendum is. There's never a point when we can ever say to ourselves that we already know all that we need to know. And the only point in life when we get there to say we already know all we need to know, you know what point in life that is? Death. And let me tell you, I know a lot of dead people who are still walking around. There are. There are a lot of dead people. If you don't keep asking questions and keep searching and keep seeking and keep learning, then you're dead. Oh, you may still be breathing and eating and sleeping, but you're dead. There's nothing going on in the brain. And it has to be that if that's God's greatest gift to us is our brains, then we have to be able to use it. Well, you can only use it so much until it's all the energy is used up. So what do you got to do? You got to feed the brain some more. There are some, sadly, in our churches, all of our churches, and maybe that's why there aren't a whole lot of young people, because somehow we take on ourselves a superior arrogance. But it's based upon what we learned in Sunday Catechism 70 years ago. That's all we got is Sunday Catechism knowledge. That there's not any more knowledge about this mysterious God that we say, that, you know, that it's bigger than this, it's larger than this, it's more diverse, more inclusive. People roll their eyes and go, "Well, that isn't what I learned in catechism." Well, yeah, you're 90 years old and you're still relying upon your catechism to get you through life? Wow. You know, that's, what is that? Would anything else that you do in life, from the kind of businesses that you were involved in, to even working and living with your children or whatever, is that how you did the rest of your life? That you would reach, you know, once you graduated grade school or high school or college, that you didn't need to break open another book in your life? No, you wouldn't do that. Well, why would we do that in terms of our faith? Well, if our faith is still back there at catechism level 70 years ago, then I guess it does make sense as to why when some of the things that we talk about in a more progressive, more open, more inclusive kind of church, that it really does sound confusing. Because you haven't continued to be open to the teaching and to the learning and to the understanding. So that's the first thing. And it's not just in terms of preaching. that it has to come also from the study. And that's what the challenge has to be. We have to be a community that continues to study the mysteries of God and learn new things and ask new questions and be open to new answers when it challenges the old answers that we got settled on back 70 years ago. The second one is fellowship. Well, we seem to do that one okay. But you see, I need to challenge you on it, that the fellowship is not just what we do after the service is over with. I often say fellowship isn't just about coffee and donuts. And this is what makes the Christian community, at least it did in the first few centuries, it's what made the Christian community countercultural to the society in which they lived. That the fellowship said, and I think you do this well, this is one of the things that we do well and maybe need to do better about in some areas. But the fellowship here has to do with our willingness to always be thinking of others first before ourselves. That the fellowship is a willingness, not in an overpowering way, to become involved in one another's lives. Oftentimes people come and say, well, did you hear about this? And I go, no, I didn't. How am I supposed to know that happened? If nobody calls us at the office and lets us know, or nobody lets me know before Sunday service what's going on, I don't know. I don't have super radar. I may be ordained, but I don't have super radar information to know what's going on in the larger community. So that's a part of what fellowship is, not just telling me, I know Monday I'm going to get all these phone calls telling me everything that's going on. And some of it I don't want to know. But the fellowship, you see, how we're known by the world is how we are willing to take care of each other. And sometimes today, in the modern world, that might mean that we make a phone call to neighbors who care. It might be that. We don't look at who we are. We don't have all the resources that a community that might be 1,000 people, we don't have all the physical resources that we need to meet everybody's needs. But the world, Neighbors Who Care may, hospice may, lots of other organizations exist out there. It's easy. Make a phone call. We'll help with that. We'll get people the resources and to get them to the right places where they need to get to. That we can do. That's also, perhaps, in the modern world, in the modern church, fellowship that we can do. The second one is the breaking of bread. And unfortunately, we're in a tradition that only does this once a Sunday. And communities where communion is celebrated every Sunday, maybe in our old German Reformed part of the United Church of Christ, where that was done and still is done in those churches every Sunday, that maybe there isn't a sense that when we're able to break bread with each other, that we are indeed opening our lives, breaking open our lives in a vulnerability that allows people to see through the hardened shell of us who we are at times, and to see this compassion and this love and this willingness to forgive. Because when we break bread in the way that Jesus broke bread, is we're breaking open our lives. That's a part of the Eucharistia, that's something that people outside need to be able to see. And the last one, in terms of prayer, there's two parts of this. These are both words in the Scripture. One is liturgia. And it's interesting that was a secular word for early Christianity. And liturgia meant the work of the people. It's interesting, in the city of Athens, where this word was frequently heard, that when it came time for the Council of Athens to decide on policy for the city of Athens, all the people of Athens were called together at a hill opposite the Acropolis, and they would engage in liturgia, which meant that they would engage in dialogue and debate and discussion and reflection. And then when the vote would be called, this public act of committing themselves to undertake a certain policy or program for the city, that they would publicly affirm that in this ritual that announced to the world, this is who we are, this is what we're about, and it all is, the end process is what usually is only seen, but it's that whole process, talking, reflecting, dialoguing, discussing, challenging, asking questions, studying, all of that comes together in the public ritual, in a sense. Oftentimes I use the word liturgy. Now what we do here is liturgy. It's the public action. It's not my action. It's our public statement to the world that when we engage in this form of prayer, of worship, that we are truly involved in the life of Jesus. And that the diaconia should flow out of that. And the diaconia isn't just serving communion. Diaconia is the willingness to put our lives in service to the most vulnerable and the most needy in our community. That we are engaged in that work of service, whatever it might be. In a sense, everyone is a deacon. It's not just those on a committee or a board. Everyone is a deacon. Because that flows out of our baptism and flows into the life of the community. So you see, the hallmarks of the community are not just so that we know this is who we are, because it should be that if something is missing, and that person at the Agora Safeway says, you know, I don't see you really doing these things, then it comes back to us to ask the question, are we truly a Christian community shaped by the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus? If something is missing, then it should challenge us to do something about that. And it's not just because, well, we can't do that because we don't have people who will do it. Okay, that may be a legitimate concern. Then it should raise us, then what can we do? And what do we need to do? And I put this in terms of a shepherding community, you know, just some last thoughts about it. I'm not sure anymore that talking about sheep and shepherding and all of that is viable language to use because people don't know what that is really, what sheep and shepherding is all about. And unfortunately, as I was reading this, listening to this, it said, you know, I will go out before them. And so you got the image of the shepherd always leading the sheep. And perhaps, you know, unfortunately, Protestants got this just as much as Catholics got this, that somehow or another that usually meant the ordained clergy person was the one who was leading the flock. Well, it'd be like this, and I'm a fast walker, okay, that was why I was challenged by my foot thing. And so this happens with Steve and I. Sometimes I'm just walking and I'm talking to him and I turn around and he's half a block back behind me. And I go, what the heck? So I had to turn around and walk all the way back. What? You know, will you keep up with me? That's sometimes the shepherd. You see, if the shepherd was out in front, that's what would happen. You all would still be having coffee at the Agora Safeway, and I'm already 3 blocks away, ready to lead the community. And then what happens with that? Then I look like a total idiot out there by myself, turning around going, what the heck are you doing? Well, you know what I found out was that if you go to the Middle East, it's very fascinating. That wasn't how the shepherds worked in the Middle East. Most of the time, the shepherds would be sitting on a rock, just kind of letting the sheep go wherever they want. Oh my God, that's absolute chaos if we did that. But you see, the smart shepherd would kind of, you know where the shepherd would actually be? Not in the front. He'd be with the pole and the rod like, get going, you silly sheep, get going. You've already taken the grass down to the bare rock. There ain't nothing here to eat. Let's go to the next field. And he'd be pushing them along. Get going. Come on, let's go to the next field where the green grass is. And that's true. I saw that in Israel, in Palestine. The shepherd is at the back or in the middle of. And so the image is, here's perhaps what I thought this morning. Try this on, see if the analogy may not quite work. And that's all this is an analogy. It works in the first century. I'm not convinced in the 21st century it can be this way. So here's a thought. What if it was the idea of being a mentor? Being a mentor. That we're asked to be mentors to not just the next generation or the generation after, but we're asked to be mentors. Meaning that we have to have a pretty good idea of what it is. We don't have to have all the answers. Because sometimes mentors are smart enough to know that if it's a question that they don't know, and sometimes you can make up things. I really don't know what the answer is, but I'm going to make up something just to let you be impressed with the fact that I know something. Because if you realize that I don't know this, then you're going to not want to ask me any more questions. And so it could be this, and I do this with some of my students. I get asked a question, and so here's how I respond. I really don't know the answer for that. But let's go find out what it is together. That's what a mentor is. I'm 85 years old, and I really don't know what being a Christian is ultimately all about. But I've got some good ideas. And I've got some successes and some failures that are part of my life's journey. And that's what I can share with you. I can share with you the struggles and the trials and the tribulations and the joys and successes. And I can tell you, I found God in some very strange and mysterious places that you might be surprised at. And it ain't at Starbucks, and it ain't at the climbing wall either. We can be mentors. We don't have to be shepherds. We can be mentors that stand in the midst of the community with all the wisdom that we have and all the experience. And again, it doesn't have to be perfect. That's a part of Christian community is we don't have to be perfect. We just have to be on the way to perfection. And sometimes it's going to work and sometimes it's not going to work. And sometimes the student might have a pretty good idea to pay attention to. And that we as mentors even have to be open. Wow, I had never looked at it that way. I had a person in one of my class, my last point, I had a person in class, and I don't know, I said some crazy, outrageous thing. Not that I ever say crazy or outrageous things. And the student objected to what I said, and I was really ticked off. I said, I'm the teacher, I have authority. I'm going to tell you what is right. And the student objected. And I went home that night, and for the whole week I fussed and fumed with myself because that student dared to object to something that I said. And I came back in class, and I had it all logically laid out, and I said, here it is. And the student objected again. And I thought, what the heck? I got it all logically worked out. And I fussed and fumed for a whole nother week. And it dawned on me that what the student was saying was actually right. And I couldn't see it at both of those weeks. Because I was so committed to what I thought was right that I wasn't able to listen, to hear, and to see that what they were saying was right. And I actually got up in class the third week and I apologized. And I said, thank you. Thank you for letting me know that what I said was not right. And that you push me to be open to search for the truth. We can be mentors, shepherds, whatever it might be. And I say that because anybody who's new, who maybe has not had any background in God or Jesus or church, that if we present the facade of having it all together and all the knowledge, guess what will happen? They won't be that. Because they're searching and seeking and want us to walk with them in the journey of searching and seeking. And that's what church has to be about.